Neryl, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm fine, and we are the opposite side of the world. You're in Perth, Australia, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's 3 o'clock over here, so a bit of a time difference.
And it's 9 in the morning here in Switzerland. So welcome to my little show, and thank you very much for accepting. So, Neryl, you have I heard about you reading your book, Mercenary Mom, which I put the link below. Excellent book about your experience in Iraq.
Yes.
So you've been a mercenary. Is that the term that you like to use? Is this a positive term in Australia?
No, and actually it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek attempt at, basically they like to call professional security contractors mercenaries, and it has that negative implication that we work to overthrow governments or something like that. But it's a term that actually security contractors don't like. We don't like that terminology at all. And I've had it thrown at me so many times. Oh, you're just a mercenary. You're just a mercenary, and that's not it at all. So it was my attempt to take that dirty word and throw it back at everyone else that dared to call me one. So yeah.
So that was in 2005.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So
yeah.
what led you to want to go to Iraq? Because that was just after the war, and it was still pretty dangerous.
Yeah, well, at the time I was in the Australian Army and I was with the military police, and our troops were just starting to deploy over there on peacekeeping type operations to get the Australian ambassador and his staff to different appointments around the Baghdad area. So as military police, one of our primary taskings was to provide close personal protection to the ambassadors and his staff. Unfortunately, at the time, due to my rank and my gender, it wasn't likely that I was going to be deployed on that particular tasking anytime soon. And the reason for that is the military police were attached to a security detachment of infantry soldiers. So for an officer, a military police officer, to fit into that organisation, they had to have a secondary role within that company. And for them, it was a 2IC type position. And there was no way at that time that they were ready to employ a female MP into the 2IC of an infantry company. So the likelihood of me going was very slim. So I began to look at the emerging private security contractor scene that was developing over there. And the more I started to investigate it, the more I wanted to be a part of it. I saw it as that's my way of being able to do that job without any restrictions on my gender or rank. So I found a company that needed women because there were female VIPs to look after, and that was basically my ticket to getting onto that contract and into the private security world in Iraq. So that was my main motivation. I wanted to do the job that I couldn't do in the army.
Now, the reason of going to Iraq, was there some, now of course that's quite some, almost more than 10 years after that. And we all grow wiser. I don't want to say older, but we grow wiser with age. How does, from 10 years after, 12 years after, do you see there was something idealistic about your willingness to go to a country that was destroyed and needed to be rebuilt?
Well, you definitely have a perception that you're going to go over there and you're going to make a difference. You do your little bit to help make the world a little bit more peaceful by keeping people safe that are in some position to create change over there. So I guess I naively went over there thinking that I was going to play some part. And I guess I did play some part, but it's a very small part and you don't necessarily see the benefits of what you've done or how that's played out. And some of that can be a language and a cultural barriers. You don't actually understand what they're saying or what the meetings are. All you're focused on is getting them from A to B. But Yeah, I guess you kind of go over there hoping to do your bit. You don't necessarily see the results, and maybe we did something good, maybe we had no effect at all. It's hard to say.
Good. No, I asked that because I was, of course, there in 2005 as well. My job was more in IT, so more regarding the setting up of databases for the elections. Now, in 2005, it was a very dangerous time. I remember I was in the Italian sector because I speak Italian, and that was the reason I had the opportunity to go there. And I must be frank, I went for the money because I needed money at that time. And it was good money at the time. But in Iraq, it was very dangerous. If you took the big roads to the airports, there was risk of explosive devices on the side. There were risks of attacks. In your book, you explain how some of your friends and colleagues, unfortunately, were killed through one of those attacks. And I found the way you described the feelings that, perhaps you can tell us that you have these opposite feelings. On one side, you want revenge. On one side, you feel anger. But on the other side, you feel compassion and love, and you think about the families of the people. And yet you are stuck there, and it can happen to you. And you had some children, a son, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot, and especially for a mother, I know as a father, but I can imagine for the mother it's even more strong feelings. How does that work in your head and in your heart, and how do you deal with that while on operations?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I guess in my mind, I've always tried to retain a sense of who I am and what I believe in and what I think's right and what I think wrong. And I guess like just leaving to go to Iraq in the first place, you're kind of conflicted because I'm a mother, I have, a beautiful son, but I also want to go over to Iraq and do the job that I'd been trained for, for so many years of my life, and to do something to help that side of the world just a little bit. So you're kind of conflicted between the two. But I guess in my mind, I knew my son would be with his dad. His dad loved him, would look after him. I knew he'd be in safe hands and he would have an opportunity to spend more time with him because we were divorced. So there were lots of benefits and disadvantages of leaving. So when I went over there, you just try and maintain focus on doing what your job was. And I guess I had to kind of put my focus into my work so that when I returned on holiday, I could just forget about work and completely focus on being the best mum. I'd been trying to do both as a single parent for so long in the army, and it's really tiring. So I guess that was another way, is that, well, now I have the opportunity, I can put everything into work, still maintain obvious contact with my son, and then when I came home, I could just be, the mum that made cupcakes and helped out at the canteen at school and that kind of thing, which I'd never been able to do before. So I tried to look at the benefits of both sides, and I guess I just kept with that theme while I was working. I just tried to maintain focus on what my job was and tried to do it to the best of my ability.
Now, it's a very, very man and a macho environment. I know that, being one myself. Now, when you're few women or the only woman in such an environment, and actually I think you describe that pretty acutely and well in the book, you sometimes have people who have really bad manners. And also in general, it's an environment that especially, it really today would be scandalous, but 10 years ago this was still considered okay. And how do you manage? Do you have to toughen up and be man-like, or do you put your rules straight? Of course, I've read the book, so I know what of things you had to do. But that I think is very interesting for all the women who listen to us. How do you manage this environment?
Basically, I went in there just going, I'm just going to shut up. I'm not going to say anything. I just want to blend in so that the guys don't even think of me as someone that's causing them problems, someone that might complain because they don't have their own toilet or bathroom or anything like that. My strategy was to go in, make as little noise as possible and get them to accept me once they saw my abilities. So I tried to show them my training and how it would benefit them, that I knew what I was doing. So basically I tried to get get their acceptance just through showing them that I was trained, that I knew what I was doing, that they could rely on me and that kind of thing. So that was my strategy going in. Then once you get to know people and you start to get confident and then you start realising that, well, actually you're just a little bit more trained or had more formal training is probably the better word than some of the people that you're working with. And then you start to offer some ideas and some constructive criticisms or whatever, and that's basically where things can go downhill because when you are the only female, you have no voice, and to try and give any advice or act or take on a leadership role or anything like that was basically shut down because it was a very strong boys' club culture. It wasn't a regulated industry that rewarded people based on skills and what they could offer. It was very much, if you were friends with the right people, then you were put in charge, which was obviously to our team's detriment. But, so my advice would be go in, keep your mouth shut for a while and just watch how things progress. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where your voice doesn't matter, that nothing you say can change your workplace culture, then, I'd strongly suggest perhaps looking for a new contract and be in an environment where what you say does matter.
Because obviously, as you said, in a boys' club culture, the elephant in the room is that you were recently divorced, so you don't have like a husband at home that you are basically considered single, first of all, and second of all,
yep.
Let's face it, you are very attractive, you're a pretty woman, and therefore all the men, well, actually I think even if you're not pretty, they would still be you're the only woman
yep.
around, so there is this kind of men can become crazy around the woman if there's no woman around. Especially considering that I can remember that in Iraq, this is not like Vietnam, or the culture around is not a culture where you have a lot of easy to seduce women in the streets, right? It's a very closed society in terms of sex differences. And of course, you have to add up to the rest of your job this dimension where you have to decide where do you put the limits in terms of fraternization, let's say, with people, especially people which may have your life at stake, and their life is at stake with you as well. You protect each other, right? So that's I know it is the elephant in the room question, right?
Yep, yeah, and look, I totally agree with it. It's very difficult to work in an environment where you've got guys cracking onto you all the time, and you say no, you say no, you say no, and then eventually you just say yes, and that's not to say that you didn't like the person or whatever, but if you're in an environment where your leadership chain doesn't say, hey, this is unacceptable in our team for these reasons, then eventually it's going to happen. However, if you have a management team that actively says, look, we don't have it in our teams because it can create conflict, it can compromise team security, whatever it is, if they support that kind of ideology, it at least takes away the guys from asking you all the time, or vice versa if it was the other way around. So certainly having a strong leadership management train with a policy, and that does help both genders. But part of that's also education and them saying, look, these are some of the problems you can have. If one person breaks up, the other person's not happy. You're never going to have two happy people breaking up. You're only going to possibly have one. This doesn't work well. It gets people in the wrong mental psychology for going out and doing team missions and that kind of thing. And this is why we don't have it. and you know that's something that I do agree with. But you know, I was you've got to show, I guess, team discipline in all areas in order for the team to not stray or play when the cat's out, whatever. Or so you need that strong discipline throughout, not just in fraternisation, but you know, with practicing team drills, with you know, not condoning, you know, binge drinking or drug taking or partying or anything like that. It's got to be throughout for all facets of the job.
Yes, because one of the perhaps unique aspects of those operations in Iraq, you were around Baghdad, right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
So that it was a dangerous environment, but at the same time, it wasn't so dangerous in the sense that you were not under siege or in the, you know, it wasn't really a high intensity war. Therefore, you had roughly safe spaces, most of, you know, to rest, and so there wasn't that constant fear of death. However, to go back on the operation side, when you are moving VIPs around, where you are moving from one spot to the other, and you have to go in the outside where there can be explosives, where there can be attacks, where there can be kidnapping attempts. You are under stress because you are, you know, you have to be wide awake and look around. How did you manage the stress and the fear and anxiety during the operations when you go and you're out?
Well, I found I'd just be running through a lot of things in my head. What would I do if this happens? What would I do if that happens? It's all that mental game of, if a car drives up on me, what am I going to do? If they fire on me, what am I going to do? If the car stops, if we get ambushed, if we get attacked, what am I going to do? So you start wargaming all those different scenarios in your head until I guess you try and make it mechanical. So if something happens, you go, I know what to do because I've already thought about it and this is what I'm going to do. So you just constantly think, basically just talking through different things in your head. There's a car coming up. We used to talk a lot within the vehicle, so you knew if there was a suspect vehicle coming up, or if there was someone stopped on the side of the road, perhaps there was an IED. That constant talking and communication certainly helps keep your mind off the fear factor whilst you're working, and you just kind of let that training take over. But there is that moment just before you leave the green zone where you're like, okay, game on, and you take that deep breath, and it's like, let's hope this short journey is a safe journey, and you're just on high alert. And then when you get to the other end, it's like, okay, we can take our body armour off and sigh of relief, it's all okay, and then you basically do that.
Any of those lessons from first of all, actually, what was the most scary the most scary moment of your experience over there?
Possibly, I was working with Blackwater, and we were in these armoured vehicles, but they were what are they called? Lincolns, American Lincoln vehicles, and they were massive and big, and there weren't many of them around there, so they were shiny and black, so they hadn't been painted to a more subdued colour. So we were in this vehicle driving to somewhere. We had to go on the airport road anyway, and we had this vehicle turn up behind us. We were stuck in traffic, and it was full of masked men carrying AK-47 standing in the back of the pickup truck. And I remember seeing them going, far out, this is it. And I remember we had little tabs on our door handle so that we could open the door up quickly and point our gun out and fire a few shots. And we were stopped at the traffic lights. We couldn't get through. This vehicle comes up, and I thought this was going to be it. My partner on the other side of the car, who was closest to the vehicle, he popped his door, let off a couple of rounds. Somehow, magically, the traffic cleared out in front of us, and we took off. And they didn't follow us. We didn't know who they were, but they were masked. They had AK-47s. They looked scary. We were told that they could have been police who didn't want their identity known, so that's how they travelled. I don't know. That's nice if that's who they were, but it was as scary as hell for the rest of us stuck in that vehicle at traffic lights behind vehicles. So that was probably the hairiest moment, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, mind you, I'm just thinking that for whoever was on the other side, or at least on the road, you guys were also with AK-47s, right? From the pictures I've seen in your book. So, and I remember in Iraq, one of the things that went through my mind is that the people in the street must have been also really scary to see us going from A to B, because, you know, if something happens near some civilians, they can get a bullet, they can get the explosion as well, and so on. So it must have been scared for everyone. And I think
Absolutely.
It still is in that country.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
So those experiences that you learned and experienced in Iraq, how did they help you in going back to civilian life or back to Australia?
I guess it gave me a bigger perspective on the world, in that, you know, these petty little arguments that we may have in our communities or between states, or, you know, even just at the workplace are so low. You know, they don't really matter. I guess when you see somewhere like Iraq, war-torn, kids don't have the opportunity to grow up in a safe environment, and, you know, women can't be educated and accepted as equals the same way we generally are in the Western world, you really feel sorry that they're battling so many things that aren't in their favour. And, you know, even when I see all our petty little skirmishes over land and airspace, and I've got bigger missiles than you, I just think, you people, you're so focused on your own little world. Why don't you look at the world from the earth as a place that we've all got to live together? And, you know, who cares if you believe in somebody's God or you don't? Just believe in their right to believe in whoever they want to. You know, I just find some of the things that we're arguing and fighting over are just so ridiculous, really, in the big scheme of things. You know, at the moment here in Australia, we have to vote on whether gay people can get married or not. And I find this so ridiculous, in that I don't have to agree with gay and lesbians getting married or not, but I believe in equality and their right to have the same things that everybody else in Australia has. So I think that the vote, you know, they've lost the fact that we have an inequity, and I guess I see things like that because I see people in Iraq that, you know, that they don't have the same things that we have.
For sure. They don't have gay marriage either.
Mm.
Actually, this leads me to, I have this tradition of always asking one political incorrect question on every interview, so brace yourself. Now, in Europe, we start to see a lot of the things that happen in Iraq happening in Europe. Do you see that happening in Australia? And we hope not, of course, but and if you do, what can people learn from people like you who have had this experience being into a war-torn, religiously biased, very strongly biased religion places, that can learn from you guys to not let this happen in your country, which I presume you like very much, as you've been in the armed forces?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, but I guess, you know, people should have the right to believe in whatever they want to believe in. That's no problems at all. But I guess we all need to understand that we also don't want to be blind to the fact that you have, let's call them untoward people that tend to be from a particular religious denomination. And I guess we need to be accepting of their right to believe in their particular religion, for those that practice it in the loving way that it was always meant to be, but not be so blind to think that they're all nice people, that we still need to have our security measures in place to ensure that nothing's untoward is being planned, I guess. So it's quite hard. I mean, I always judge people by them. I get to know a person. I just accept that they are a good person until they prove me otherwise. And doesn't mean that I don't think that if something led me to believe that they were being untoward, I wouldn't investigate it further. I just think we need to be tolerant but cautious, I guess.
Good. You survived my difficult question of the day. Good. So now you're obviously back in Australia, and I've seen from that you are doing motivational speeches, that you are teaching people what you've learned from your experience. Tell us a bit about that.
So I got into that to tell my story, but to also, I guess, inspire people to, well, a couple of things, I guess. Inspire them to believe in themselves, no matter what anybody else thinks of them or their ideas or their dreams, that if they want something, that they can actually do it and make it work for themselves. When people go, I can't believe you worked in Iraq as a security contractor, I just say, well, I got the training I needed. I applied for jobs, and all I had to do was get on a plane and go over there. So the only one that could have stopped me was myself. If you want something, go for it. But if you do something like that, I guess you need to believe in your own ideals and some of your goals and your values. And I guess because I've been harmed by quite a bad, toxic boys' club culture and extremely poor leadership, they're probably two of my biggest points that I touch on, because had the leadership been a lot stronger, had people been trained in what it means to be a leader and a manager, then those deaths of my teammates wouldn't have happened. The leadership would have stamped that out that straight away. So that's kind of a big thing with mine, is talking about leadership and what it means, and it can be a lonely job being a leader, but you draw on the strength of your team to help you keep going. And I guess they're a couple of my the points that I really like to emphasise. Excellent.
So now you live in a nice area of Australia. It's a lovely, lovely country. I've only been once. I look forward to go again one day. But my books, I write books, and my books talk about survival. And it's a big word, of course, but certainly I try to adapt them to everyday people. How can they prevent natural, or not to prevent the natural catastrophes, but how they can prevent to be harmed and to suffer unnecessarily from natural disasters or turmoil, civil unrest and things like that. It's very wide topics. Now, in particular in Australia, do you think that people have this perspective on let's get prepared so that if something goes wrong, we can cope with it? I know that you've started reading my book on women. How do you see this in Australia, or perhaps not?
Yeah, I don't see it as much in Australia as say America. America's great. They have all their doomsday prepping, their bunkers, their bug out bags, lots of tactical weapons firing with lots of different schools. So it's very big over there. And then you come to Australia, where we've got very tough gun laws. We don't have shelters or anything like that. So I wouldn't see it to the same degree. And I guess it's really just people that have maybe seen a war-torn country or really embraced that whole doomsday prepping that I guess would take any kind of precautions. And, you know, given my history overseas, even my husband's experiences overseas as well, we don't go all out crazy doomsday bunking, but that's not because we don't want to. We'd love to do that, but you just can't do it in our urban environment. But, you know, who's to say we won't buy some property? And we've got a few ideas for setting up our little underground bunkers and things like that. But we do have things ready to go if we had to bug out quickly, and, you know, and that includes our dog too.
I'm sure your friend James Yeager can tell you a lot about that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, no. To be more precise is that you know, preparing the things that can go bad. You know, can start with you know, having some money on the side, or having the right mindset in case what if there is a burglary. So for example, you mentioned gun laws in Australia that are being tougher than, for sure, tougher than Switzerland or the US. For example, did you keep some of the, and you know, I don't want you to reply anything that's too private, but for example, do you keep a gun license for yourself or your husband? Is it something that is normal in Australia to have, or not so much?
Not so much. If you want a gun license, you have to be part of a gun club, and they can place some restrictions on you. We're both fortunate. We work in jobs where we have access to guns, so we don't necessarily need to get our own private ones. And unless we buy a farm, you know, there's no real need for us to purchase a gun or anything like that. But if we wanted to do it for some recreational shooting, then we could. Mm-hmm. But I get enough of that at work.
No, for sure. What I meant is not, I took that example because, as we know, weapons are not an end by themselves. They are a tool for a situation, for, as you said, a job, or perhaps just in case. But certainly it's more the attitude and the mindset that is important, is to say, well, and that's why they're interesting, because what I read in your book when you were in Iraq is that clearly you write that, and you just repeated that, and I think it's very right, that you start to observe and look at every little detail in a very sharp way, much sharper than you would do in a normal life, of course, to say, oh, that car shouldn't be there, that person on the corner is looks bizarre. And 99.9% of the time, yeah, they look bizarre, but nothing happens. But at least you noticed that potential danger is there. We don't do this at all in day-to-day urban and city life. And yet, it's, you know, some dangers do exist. And what I'm trying to point out to people, certainly in my book, is to also, you know, have these, you know, the Cooper levels of attention, and have this, you know, not go cluelessly in bad parts of town. You know, you have to raise your attention levels, even in the cities, even in day-to-day life. You actually drive in a different way when you drive at 100 miles per hour than if you drive at 20 miles per hour, and things like that. But so in your I don't want to rant on my own. I want to ask you a question. So in your day-to-day lives and jobs, or with your family, and even, you know, your son and friends, do you perceive that people have lost that instinct? Do you see that they can gain that instinct if necessary, because sometimes it's not necessary? Or do you see that there is room for teaching the right approach to people, and perhaps they don't, and perhaps they need to read my books? I'm just asking that as an open question, really.
Yeah. Well, they do need to read your book, so that's for sure. And I do think there is a need to educate people more, because they do have so many luxuries now in life. You know, they have lighters to start a fire. They have microwaves that do their cooking. They have, you know, there's so many luxuries that we've lost a few of our basic skills. And you know, I have been thinking about this lately. You know, if something was to happen, something, who knows what. And, okay, you escape the initial, let's just call it an apocalypse, whatever. I have been thinking about how do you survive and how do you forge a new society? What can you offer that new society? What skills do you have? And, you know, there's a lot of skills that have been lost or not even passed on because we don't need to know how to make curry from scratch. We buy it in a jar now. And I think about my kids and their friends, and maybe I'm biased, but they're useless. They're Y generation millennials. They're useless. They need they do need some guidance in that area. And that's not to say if something bad happened that they wouldn't like pull it together pretty quick, but some education and some training in that area would certainly go a long way, just for their own survival and making survival less harsh.
Well, with that, Neryl, I thank you very much for the interview, and I wish you the best. And who knows, maybe if you one day come to Europe, or if I come to Australia, we'll chat some more.
Absolutely, we will.
Thanks a lot.